Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Weekend, our global look at the top stories in the coming week from our Daybreak anchors all around the world. Straight ahead on the program, we look ahead to the last of the Mag 7 earnings with chip giant Nvidia reporting. I'm Nathan Hager in Washington.
I'm Caroline Hepker in London, where we're delving into the special election that could redefine the UK's political future.
I'm Doug Krisner, looking ahead to Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Israel in the coming week.
That's all straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak Weekend. On Bloomberg 1130 New York, Bloomberg 99.1 Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 92.9 Boston, DAB Digital Radio London, Sirius XM 121, and around the world on BloombergRadio.com and the Bloomberg Business app.
Good day to you. I'm Nathan Hager. We begin today's program with earnings from AI chip giant Nvidia. The last of the Magnificent Seven reports its end-of-year results after the close of trading on Wednesday. For more, we're joined by Kunjan Subhani, senior semiconductor analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. Great to have you with us on the program, Kunjan. Of course, Nvidia has been at the center of the AI spending story for so long. So where do you see the bar when it comes to Nvidia's results this time around?
As usual, the expectations will run high. Folks are expecting the usual, or if not better, than the mid-single digit beat and raise that we have gotten used to with them, which I think is quite possible given multiple drivers that have gotten better since their last quarterly earnings. We have heard from the largest customers of Nvidia, and most of them have increased their CapEx projections significantly. Some of them 40 to 50% in case of Google and Amazon for 2026. So that really helps. We have heard of deals being made since last quarter with these hyperscalers and other customers adopting millions of units of Nvidia, which should drive further upside to that 500 billion number that Jensen had provided end of last year regarding the Blackwell and Rubin backlog for through 2026. So estimates are running higher than that, and we expect them to give indications that it is going to run higher than that. And finally, the third key point will be visibility on resuming the H2, or I should say starting the H200 shipments to China, because that will be a key upside driver if that happens soon. And we did see AMD start to ship some of its prior generation shipments to China in this quarter when there is reported results.
Let's take some of those points in turn, Kunjan. You mentioned the millions of units deployed. I think that was an allusion to the announcement we heard just a few days ago from Meta Platforms. Does that sort of raise the bar when it comes to the outlook that we're expecting to hear from Jensen in the call this week?
It does raise the bar for the full year. I don't know if it raises the bar for the next quarter outlook. That deal with Meta, it's a long-term deal, and the lead times will be longer than to get the revenue in this quarter. So it does raise the bar for the full year, though.
And when it comes to the pipeline for future chips, we heard Jensen talk about the Rubin semiconductor being on track for the second half of this year at the recent conference that Nvidia held. Are we expecting any more clarity when it comes to some of those next generation chips from Nvidia?
I'm sure we will hear some commentary that evaluations are going well, etc. Remember, this was a very unique time. Usually at CES, Nvidia in the past has not talked about their next generation products, which are released at the end of the year. Usually they save that for the GTC, which will be their marquee event happening in March. Them talking about this early in the year gave investors confidence that there would be sort of no hiccups with the Rubin ramp as there were with Blackwell. So that's a good news. We'll definitely hear some update, but I think most of the big news will be saved for him to talk about at GTC next month.
And when it comes to the re-entry of the H200 chip that you mentioned in China, we've heard Jensen in the past talk about, even keeping China revenue off the table. They're still going to put out pretty significant numbers. How important is it, though, for Nvidia to get back into the Chinese market to keep its momentum going?
I think it is definitely important. Look, most of the other areas they are dominating, so investors are very aware. So this is a market which, if it does open up significantly for them, they can go and grab another significant share, a dominant share before the shipment sanctions had come in. Nvidia was a dominant share of that market. So definitely very important. Could easily, if the gates get open, you can easily think about adding somewhere between 7 to 12, $13 billion back, which is a substantial amount. Yes, will not move. I mean, if the company is going to about to be making 150, $200 billion, you can argue 5 to 12 billion is small, but still a significant upside.
And of course, there's been so much discussion within the market about, whether there's too much spending in AI, whether it's circular spending, and even this AI disruption trade. How do you expect Nvidia's results to color some of that debate on Wall Street?
I don't think. I mean, and if anything, a better result from Nvidia could keep these arguments going forward. I don't think better results will help with diminishing these arguments. In fact, a weak result could slow down this argument, giving people the more validity that these concerns are real. We don't think these concerns are real at this point, and as long as Nvidia keeps doing better and better, I don't think these arguments will go away anywhere.
Appreciate this, Kunjan, ahead of those earnings from Nvidia. Much appreciated. That is Kunjan Sabhani, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Semiconductor Analyst. Let's take a look now at some stocks making news in the week ahead. I'm Nathan Hager, joined by Bloomberg Markets Live Managing Editor Christine Aquino. I thought we were almost done with earnings, Christine, but it looks like we got some pretty big names reporting this week, including Home Depot on Tuesday. Was the holiday quarter a time people were thinking about home improvement?
Oh, well, Nathan, I think from what we've heard from Home Depot, things are not looking great. They have implemented a lot of cutting measures over the last couple of months. So this month, for example, the company said it's making the requirements for bonus payouts to managers more strict. They're telling eligible employees that they now have a higher threshold for sales performance metrics to be able to receive this bonus. And then in January, they also said that they're going to be cutting jobs across several teams and also requiring corporate staff to return to the office. And so it really seems like Home Depot is really bracing for a challenging quarter that's probably going to be reflected in the earnings results that we're going to be seeing. And so it's just a question of whether, once investors see them, are they going to see enough of a silver lining in those results? Whether it's the cost-cutting measures that Home Depot implemented or anything else that they're doing that would give them a steadier footing moving forward. That's probably going to be what's in focus for investors next week.
It is interesting, though. I mean, we're still off the high from September for Home Depot, but the stock's been kind of on a bit of a bounce here over the last couple of months. So does that mean the bar is kind of higher for Home Depot when it comes to the earnings?
Yeah, I suppose you could say that just because, it has weathered a lot of storms over the last few months. They have been warning for quite some time now about a slowdown in housing, which is very much affecting their bottom line. But at the same time, we have seen, as you mentioned, a resilience in the shares. And so perhaps there is some of that optimism baked in already that the company will be able to keep afloat its earnings outlook, its revenue outlook. And so, if there is some disappointment there, we'll probably see that in the aftermath of the reaction to the earnings coming.
Moving from Home Depot, another stock that starts with H reports on Tuesday. HP, where are they when it comes to the AI tech story?
Yeah, I mean, very interesting when it comes to HP. Of course, it did get a bit of a boost when it comes to the AI story, right? It was very much involved in that trade back in the latter part of 2025 when it was all about the expansion of the AI trade to the various companies involved in implementing the data center build out. And HP is a part of that supply chain. But, our analysts at Bloomberg Intelligence Intelligence really focusing in on margins for HP here. They are big in the PC space, a lot of pressure there when it comes to margins, and so that's a big question whether they're going to be able to keep that up. Also, question about their memory supply. Is that supply chain again going to be resilient and moving forward? It's a big question whether they're going to be able to maintain pricing power, given that the environment at the moment for anything AI related is a little bit more challenging, as we've seen in recent price action.
Is that what we're seeing reflected in terms of the kind of steady decline that we've been seeing in HP's chart over the last few months?
Yeah, absolutely, Nathan. I mean, I think it is one of these stocks, very interesting. It's just kind of right in the middle of kind of institutional AI demand, right? Given that it is part of the build-out story, but then at the same time, a lot of fluctuations due to its spot when it comes to the consumer space, right? Like its PC offering still very much subject to the whims of the consumer. And as we've been hearing from a lot of other companies, that is quite a challenging environment. It's not that consumers are fully scaling back on their purchases. They're just being more strategic about it. And that may be where HP's vulnerabilities really may be exposed.
And on Thursday, we hear from one of HP's competitors. Is it going to be a similar story when it comes to Dell Computer?
Yeah, I mean, for Dell, it really has been a rough start to 2026, right? We've seen their shares down more than 7%. They very much did get wrapped up in the early 2026 declines for U.S. equities in general, given all these fears about AI disruption. And for Bloomberg Intelligence, their outlook really focusing in on the AI server demand that Dell is enjoying. And so that is a positive for them. And that's allowed them to have a more broad consumer base. Our analysts are very much optimistic in terms of their ability to sustain that momentum through 2030. So high expectations potentially for this earnings result, possibly a high potential for disappointment as well.
Okay. Well, another busy earnings week on tap. Thanks for this, Christine. Good having you with us.
Absolutely.
That's Christina Aquino, Managing Editor for Bloomberg Markets Live. Coming up on Bloomberg Daybreak Weekend, we'll look at the special election that could redefine the UK's political future. I'm Nathan Hager, and this is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Weekend, our global look ahead at the top stories for investors in the coming week. I'm Nathan Hager in Washington. Up later in our program, we'll look ahead to Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Israel. But first, in the coming days, a special election in the UK could highlight the fractured state of British politics. Bookmakers are predicting a three-horse race between Labour and the insurgents on the right and left. Gambling odds compiled by Odds Checker suggest the Green Party will edge out Reform, with the incumbent Labour Party third. For more, let's go to London and bring in Bloomberg Daybreak Europe anchor Caroline Hepker.
Nathan, in an unassuming and often neglected Manchester suburb, a three-way fight is hotting up between challenger parties Reform UK and the Green Party, who are vying to pry the area's parliamentary seat away from the incumbent governing Labour Party. With a special by-election looming in Gorton and Denton on the 26th of February, the battle is highlighting the sinking popularity of Prime Minister Keir Starmer's Labour administration and the rising fortunes of populist competitors on both the right and the left. It's an uncertain situation that could have implications for the UK's politics and economic prospects. Sri Gochagovindan is senior research economist at UK asset manager Aberdeen. She says the instability could prove costly.
What we're seeing, it's been a good week for bond markets in the UK and elsewhere, but there is a lot of premium already in the gilt market. But I have to say a lot of rates investors are cautious. And I think these key events like the by-election in 10 days' time, the local elections in May, there is the acceptance that there is likely to be a leadership change later this year. So obviously we had a bit of a flashpoint 2 weeks ago and gilts really sold off quite aggressively. And that is an issue for the government. High interest rates are an issue for the government. So whoever leads the UK later this year will have to keep that in mind.
So perhaps a challenge to the Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Sri Kutchagovindan, senior research economist at UK asset manager Aberdeen, speak to me and Stephen Carroll on Bloomberg Radio. So will the coming local contest between the government and all its challengers leave Starmer vulnerable or vindicated? Joining me now to discuss is our Bloomberg UK economy reporter Irina Angel and our UK politics reporter Lucy White. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being with us. Lucy, should we start with a bit of the politics? Set the scene. Why is this by-election so crucial for Keir Starmer?
So there's not very often in between general elections that we get a sort of national vote like this, because this isn't, your kind of usual local politics kind of election. This is a by-election for a seat in Westminster. So it's the first real test that we're going to have for an area where they are electing a new person to Westminster. This is all because Andrew Gwynn has resigned on health grounds, but he was also caught up in a bit of a scandal. He's the Labour incumbent at the moment around leaked WhatsApp messages. And this is going to be the first real test we have of who these people in Gorton and Denton want as their representative. And as you were saying just then, there's a real flashpoint at the moment as to, obviously there's some kind of idiosyncratic reasons why people are not a fan of Labour in that area. But there's also this kind of real challenge, real tussle going on between Reform and the Greens at the moment. And if this goes badly for Labour in Manchester, or in this particular suburb of Manchester, where Labour have really had a sort of stronghold for several years, the implications for this nationally are pretty stark.
We only have polling at the moment, but how much ground might Labour have lost in this region? Who are the front runners?
So it's really a three-way tie at the moment. We've got Labour as the incumbents, and then we've got the Green Party, who are really hoping to make gains on the sort of populist left of politics, and Reform, who are at the polar opposite end of that, sort of looking to make headway on the populist right. And they're, kind of involved in this three-way battle. It's hard to tell who is doing particularly well at the moment, because there's no sort of, there is polling at a local level, but none of it's, kind of particularly reliable. The sample sizes just aren't as big. From myself and Irina, when we were on the ground last week in the area, there's a huge amount of visibility for the Green Party. There's posters everywhere. There's a lot of campaigners on the ground. For Reform, there's very little visibility, but kind of local polling does seem to see them doing quite well. As for Labour, there's a lot of people who are kind of, well, I've voted Labour all my life, so I probably will. But there's an equal number, I'd say, that we spoke to, of the people that we spoke to there, who say, whether it's due to the Andrew Gwynn WhatsApp scandal or whether it's due to Keir Starmer, just saying, I will never vote Labour again in my life.
Irina, take us through the economics then. We know that for a long time, UK wages and incomes really haven't risen very much. The economy isn't growing very quickly. How has that manifested in Manchester, and how do residents there feel about it?
When Lucy and I went up there, I would say that the top issue that came up in Gorton and Denton was the rising cost of living. And, you have that. You also have the rise in the cost of doing business. There's also, other issues related to flight tipping, decaying estates, drug dealing. And, underneath this, you could sense that there is one big issue. And that issue is that the community is decaying, but things didn't used to be like this, So the people of Gorton and Denton, they seem to be people who take pride in where they come from and pride in who they are. And there's a sense that that's now been taken away from them. And who do they blame for this? They blame the government. Labour came in with big promises. There was real hope that things will change quickly, but they haven't for, many reasons. Perhaps some of are the fault of policy. Others are, are just the result of structural factors, which, could never be turned around very quickly. MP and local people also blame their previous MP, Andrew Gwynn. Some told us they wrote to him to complain, but they never heard back. So they feel like things are not getting better, and also that they're getting neglected.
I think that's really interesting. So then what do we know about the economic profile of those who perhaps are likely to support the challenger parties like Reform and the Greens? If you say that underneath it, there's what sounds like quite a lot of anger, maybe some hopelessness.
Exactly. And Reform and Green voters are actually very similar in a key way. They feel, and this is at the national level, not just in Gorton and Denton, but it was really interesting to see it sort of play out there. But these people feel somehow cheated on by the political economy of the country. So Luke Trill from More in Common put this very well. He told me that you ask people, is the system working? And the answer tends to be no. Then you ask them, okay, can we change the system from within to make it work, or do we just burn it all down? And the burn it all downers, these are the people who either go to Reform or the Greens. Which one? It depends on who they blame. For the Greens, it tends to be capitalism and big corporates capturing the economic gains from themselves and leaving everyone else worse off. So you have, young, university-educated people who are a big demographic for them. And for Reform, it's really blaming immigration and migrants, putting a strain on public services.
I'm sure that Labour are putting up a good fight and trying to make their case for why perhaps they need more time or the progress that they've made so far. Lucy, in terms of Keir Starmer, how much damage could it do potentially if Labour were to fail to retain this parliamentary seat?
I think it will be embarrassing for them, but at the same time, I'm not sure that people within Labour have a huge amount of hope for it going particularly well at the moment. I think, it's important to realise that this is just one area, and that, I dare say, if I were to be devil's advocate for Labour, they would say that there are, some very idiosyncratic issues in this area. For example, the WhatsApp scandal that Andrew Gwynn was involved in. But at the same time, it is going to be hugely embarrassing for them if they lose in a seat where, as recently as 2024, they won 50.8% of the vote, and even more. It's kind of hard to compare because the boundaries were slightly different in the general election before that in 2019, but it would have been even higher back then. So I think if Labour are to go from that level to totally losing the seat, it is a kind of really worrying sign for them, because if we're to have, this pattern repeated across the country in areas where Labour was never this good, then, they're really looking at a kind of potential wipeout at the next election, which is due to be held by the next general election, which is due to be held by 2029.
So in terms of what's going on with the demographics in the constituency, I think that's also quite interesting, and there's been quite a lot of focus on that in terms of the economic challenges, worries, complaints or hopes that people have for that. Tell us about the demographics, Irina.
So Gorton and Denton has been called the Frankenstein constituency because it's made up of very different parts. You have Gorton, and crucially, this is where 2/3 of the population lives. And Gorton is very ethnically diverse. 40% of residents identify as Muslim. One of the main places we visited there is the Longside Market, this big open-air market reminiscent of Istanbul bazaars. And it also has Gorton has a large share of students and university graduates, and a larger share of these people than Denton. So Gorton is fertile ground, for Labour and the Greens. Both have their headquarters there. And as Lucy said, we saw lots of Green posters, but not that many Labour, I would say, when we visited last week. And then, then there's Denton. And as soon as you cross into Denton, you can almost tell the difference because the houses are bigger somehow. And, Reform has set up its HQ there, and it's in a large, sort of sleek warehouse. And regardless whether you're from Gorton or Denton, I think all voters seem to agree on one thing. They won't vote Labour again. But not many people have made up their mind about whether they go to the Greens or Reform. So, Reform seems to be alienating voters in the ethnically diverse Gorton with its anti-immigration message. And, some residents said they won't vote for them because they're racist. However, the Greens similarly are putting off other voters. For example, there was this resident we spoke to who said, I don't like Labour. I will vote for Reform even though I don't agree with their stance on immigration, but I won't vote for the Greens because I don't like their stance on puberty blockers. So it's really, really up in the air, sort of who will win.
Okay, thank you to both of you for your reporting on the ground and for being with me here today. My thanks to Bloomberg's economics reporter Irina Angel and to our politics reporter Lucy White. Thank you. Now, I want to read out a full list of the candidates, of course, who are running for this by-election in Gorton and Denton. Nick Buckley, Advance UK, Charlotte Cadden, Conservative Party, Dan Clark, Libertarian Party, Matt Goodwin, Reform UK, Sebastian Moore, Social Democratic Party, Joseph Omicha, Rejoin EU Party, Jackie Piercy, Liberal Democrats, Hannah Spencer, Green Party, Angeliki Stogia, Labour Party, Sir Oinkelot, the official monster raving loony party, Hugo Wills, Communist League. I'm Caroline Hepker here in London. You can catch us every weekday morning here for Bloomberg Daybreak Europe beginning at 6 a.m. in London. That's at 1 a.m. on Wall Street. Nathan.
Thanks, Caroline. And coming up on Bloomberg Daybreak Weekend, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is set for a 2-day visit to Israel. We'll look at what to expect next. I'm Nathan Hager, and this is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Weekend, our global look ahead at the top stories for investors in the coming week. I'm Nathan Hager in Washington. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is set for a 2-day visit to Israel in the week ahead. For a preview, let's get to Doug Krisner, host of the Bloomberg Daybreak Asia podcast.
Thanks, Nathan. This will be Modi's second visit to Israel in 8 years. Back in July 2017, he became the first Indian prime minister to travel to Israel with the goal of elevating ties. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said there is a tremendous alliance between these two countries. For a closer look, I'm joined by Bloomberg's Rosalind Matheson. She is Chief Asia Correspondent. Roz joins from our studio in Singapore. Thank you for being here. From what I've read, Netanyahu and Modi are expected to discuss various forms of cooperation. Do you have a sense of which areas might be prioritized?
Two key areas really probably with their conversation. One is momentum towards a free trade agreement. I mean, India tends to move very slowly on trade deals over many years, but they're suddenly in this environment of diversify or die around the world on trade. They're rushing to get trade deals done. I mean, they just did significant trade deals with the EU and also with the US. So there is movement here on the Israeli front. And there's significant trade relationship already between the two countries. I mean, Israel is a significant buyer of refined petroleum products from India, diamonds as well. India is Israel's second biggest trading partner in Asia. I think bilateral trade last year was around $5 billion. So there's a lot to talk about on the trade front, and there's a lot to talk about on the defense front, because India is obviously also moving away from Russia in terms of weapons that it buys. It's still its biggest market, but it is moving to buy more weapons from the US, from France, and from Israel. And so there'll be a lot of discussion around the potential there around defense, but also as part of that, technology sharing when it comes to defense. And so can they produce stuff together, but can they share the technology when they do so?
So India, as I understand, is also engaged in more outreach to the Arab world. Last month, India hosted the second India-Arab foreign ministers meeting, and I'm wondering whether that necessarily complicates in some way Modi's mission?
Well, yes and no. I mean, India has been a strong supporter of Israel. There's a clear relationship between Narendra Modi and Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, they speak on the phone every couple of months, if not each month. And India has supplied Israel with drones and been quite a supporter when it comes to their actions in Gaza. But also they don't recognise Jerusalem as Israel's capital. There are some underlying issues there because India, above all, is trying to maintain this idea still of strategic autonomy, which they've always tried to walk a line on, which is to have a balance of relationships. And so that does mean, do they look to have outreach relationships with the Arab world as well? And is Iran potentially a factor in all of this? Because obviously there are serious tensions between Israel and Iran. There's the spectre potentially of US and Israeli intervention again in Iran. So what's going to be Modi's message to Bibi about that?
What about Modi's aim to try to bring in some capital from Israel into various sectors of the Indian economy? Are there any industries that come to mind?
Well, certainly there is further opportunity for India around stuff like diamonds. They're already exporting a lot of that to Israel, and refined petroleum products. They don't sell raw crude to Israel, but obviously there's a significant relationship there. So those will be the two key things. But obviously they just also want to set the table a bit around the parameters of this FTA. Does it involve services, for example? I mean, that's always a thorny issue for India in trade deals is services. But it's really going to be probably at a higher level around broader understandings when it comes to trade and defense.
Modi is expected to address the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. Do we have a sense of the issues that Modi may speak to?
At this stage, we do not, but we're expecting him to talk broadly about fundamental ties and to do so with some affection, particularly towards Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, Bibi says that Modi is popular in Israel. They talk again on the phone quite often. So there'll be an overarching sense of the relationship in that address if it happens to the Knesset, to the Israeli parliament. Modi will probably want to steer clear of talking about things like the West Bank, for example. India's tried not to get involved in the issues regarding the West Bank and Israel's policies there. So he'll probably steer away from that one. He might talk more broadly around the prospects for a longer-term peace in Gaza and his desire to see that happen. Of course, there's a ceasefire in Gaza, but there's big questions about how you go from that to a more fundamental long-term peace in Gaza and what it means in terms of the disarmament of Hamas, for example. But he'll probably walk a pretty clear line there about not going into particularly tricky issues around the West Bank.
What about the relationship that both India and Israel have with the United States, and particularly President Trump?
Well, it's one of those things. We're in this period where, again, relationships are shifting pretty quickly. Power balances around the world are shifting pretty quickly. And again, we're seeing that in things like trade deals getting done that were, on hiatus essentially for many years. This idea that you have to have a diversification of your relationships. And some of that is spurred by the administration of Donald Trump. Certainly there have been tensions between the US and India. We saw that really the trade deal went into the freezer for some months as a result. Donald Trump really pushing India over its purchases of Russian energy and singling India out in that. And that was really, something that Modi couldn't publicly tolerate for his prestige at home. But that said, the US and India will always have a relationship. Modi's just simply about having, that diversification strategy going. And obviously, Israel and the US, Bibi and Trump have generally a strong relationship. The occasional tussle over certain aspects of the Middle East, but it's a strong relationship. So you can imagine that, Bibi and Modi will talk quite generally in warm terms about the US during this trip.
What do we know about Modi's popularity in Israel? Is he a widely popular politician?
Well, yes, according to Bibi, the Israeli leader, Modi was the first India Prime Minister to visit Israel back in 2017. I think he had a flower named after him. It was a chrysanthemum at the time. So there is this kind of strong history of cooperation. They've had full diplomatic ties between the countries for some decades. And Modi is quite popular in Israel as a result, and seen as someone who, hasn't been overtly critical of Israel over its actions in Gaza, the conflict in Gaza. He can expect to have a very warm welcome, including by the parliament.
I'm wondering whether China will come up as a part of these discussions as well.
Yeah, certainly. Again, it's like China, the US, other great powers are always in the backdrop in these conversations at the moment in terms of how you're balancing your relationships. And India, again, trying for this idea of strategic autonomy. Relationships between India and China go up and can go down quite a bit, but they've been on a warmer track in the past year or so, driven in part by the tensions that India has had separately with the US. There's a pragmatism that comes into all these relationships, including with China, and the sense of what's China going to be doing around the Middle East, developing its own business and trade ties, including with Arab nations, and what does that lead to? So certainly it's in the atmosphere in any of these conversations, but there is a sense from both Israel and India in a way that these things need to be done in a very pragmatic fashion.
What about the area of agriculture? Is there much in the way of trade exchange between these two countries where agricultural products are involved?
Not a ton, and agriculture is just a very thorny issue for India. Again, like other countries, you've got, in a way, this kind of mythical image of the India farmer, and they are a very powerful voting bloc in India, and you can see that Modi being very cautious about, moving away from subsidies for farm products in India or trade deals that might disadvantage the farmers of his country. And he's very attuned to that and his own popularity. So they've tended to be quite protective, I would say, of the India agricultural market. So very cautious about doing deals as a result.
So from what I understand, Roz, an Israeli delegation will be leaving for New Delhi on Monday of next week for a first round of kind of trade agreement talks. So it seems like both sides are working at trying to achieve something. Is there, in your mind, a timeline here as to when something needs to be kind of agreed upon? Or is this going to be kind of a protracted, longer-term project?
Well, there is a sense that things are picking up. You had ministerial delegations going back and forth last year. As you say, there's an Israeli delegation due in New Delhi in the coming week. That's supposed to be sort of technical talks, and it's the first round of those technical talks. There was a framework agreement that was signed last November, but it's a framework, and there's a lot of work to be done here as a result. But you really do get the sense of momentum on both sides. And, some of the officials are saying that they're aiming for a deal potentially at some point this year.
Roz, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for helping us preview Prime Minister Modi's visit to Israel. That is Bloomberg's Rosalind Matheson, our chief Asia correspondent, joining us from Singapore. In the last week, India hosted an artificial intelligence summit. It was there that Prime Minister Modi said the event offered further proof that India is progressing rapidly in the fields of science and technology. At the summit, Bloomberg spoke with Arthur Mensch of the French firm Mistral AI, and he addressed the Indian market for artificial intelligence.
So what we see is that on the infrastructure side, India has taken a strong stance on sovereignty, and so that's a place where we can play an important role, because the platform we bring is something that every state we work with can actually customize. So in that respect, I believe there are a lot of synergies in between what we can provide and what India already has. They have taken some step in training models themselves as well. Again, this is a place where the open source model that we can provide can play a role, because they can be used as a basis to make models better at certain languages. This is something that we actively do with certain states, that we've done with Singapore, that we are doing with Morocco. We've released a model last year called Mistral Saba, which is specifically good at Indian languages in text. And so that's something that we can improve through partnerships with Indian companies that have access to more data. The audio models that we've released, Voxtral in particular, is very strong at Indian language. We see audio as a big way in which the consumer market in India engage with technology. And so again, that's a place where partnerships can actually take us much further, because we can provide the technology and the training stack and the GPUs and the people that know how to train models. But what we could benefit from and what we could partner on is access to data, access to the consumer market, so that we can make that technology better and put it in the hands of, for instance, the Indian government.
That was Arthur Mensch from the French firm Mistral AI, speaking to Bloomberg at the India AI Impact Summit in New Delhi. I'm Doug Krisner. You can catch us weekdays for the Daybreak Asia podcast. It's available wherever you get your podcast. Nathan?
Thanks, Doug. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Daybreak Weekend. Join us again Monday morning at 5 a.m. Wall Street time for the latest on markets overseas and the news you need to start your day. I'm Nathan Hager. Stay with us. Top stories and global business headlines are coming up right now.